Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
Is this a MPD authorized restraint technique?
A knee on the neck would be something that does happen in use of force that isn't unauthorized.
And under what circumstances would that be authorized? How long can you do that?
I don't know if there's a time frame. It would depend on the circumstance of the time.
Which would include what?
The type of resistance you're getting from the subject that you're putting the knee on.
And so if there was, say for example, the subject was under control and handcuffed, would this be authorized?
I would say no.
Let's go to the U.S. Jamal Andress is a criminal justice reporter for the American news network Newsy. Jamal, thanks for coming onto the program. I know you were in Minneapolis last week. You're now in Houston, Texas. Give us your impressions, given your experience as a criminal reporter, about what's been happening over the course of what? Now it's the 7th day.
Absolutely. I think this is an uphill battle for the defense. Obviously, the prosecution is laying out their case right now, so it's supposed to feel this way. But if you think about who we've heard from so far, we've heard powerful witnesses from the scene. We've heard from 2 people who called the police on the police, which I think is extraordinary and something you don't see often in these cases. And finally, we've heard from people from the Minneapolis Police Department, 8 separate officers who work for the Minneapolis Police Department have testified on behalf of the prosecution against Derek Chauvin. That is the most abnormal thing I think I have heard of in this kind of case. You know, typically we hear from police unions who are vehemently working for and on behalf of the officers involved, and that has not been the case. Not only that, we heard from Chief Arredondo, who is the police chief for that department, and he was very clear about where he stood on this. He was one of many officers to criticize Derek Chauvin's actions at the time. He called them murder. Not only that, but 14 officers penned a letter over the summer when Minneapolis was burning and dealing with the civil unrest. They penned an open letter condemning the actions, calling them uncalled for, saying they had no place in the Minneapolis Police Department. And so I think that piece, hearing from these other officers who are colleagues of Derek Chauvin, is a huge part to this. And I think that's the thing that's going to stick in the jurors' minds when they finally go to deliberate.
Okay, great to have your expertise because, I mean, apart from everything else you said that it's the prosecution laying out its case. So does that mean that all the witnesses we've seen so far have been specifically called by the prosecution? If that's the case, Jamal, what do you think the defense could do in terms of what kind of witness could it call to negate some of what the prosecution has been driving towards? I'm thinking, but let's hear again from your expertise and that point of opinion, I'm thinking that they're going to be looking to call a medical expert to look at that coroner's report which showed traces of methamphetamine and fentanyl in George Floyd's body.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think it's obviously hard to say what the complete defense strategy is, but I think it is safe to say they are going to have to lean on the medical bit of this for the majority of their defense. Absolutely, what we've heard so far has been the prosecution. And so you have a lot of people who are essentially telling the jurors to trust their eyes. This video went viral for a reason. It is damning if you are just watching it with no context. And I think that is what the prosecution is going for. For the defense's part, they're going to have to rely on some of that legalese. They're going to have to rely on medical experts that come in and tell the jurors that this is not what they think it is. And again, I think it's going to be hard to overrule that powerful testimony you hear from eyewitnesses. You know, a 9-year-old girl saying that this case made her sad and mad is going to be hard to get out of a regular person's mind. And that's who the jurors are made up of. But as far as the defense is concerned, again, I think it's going to come down to those medical experts who can testify to what exactly happened in George Floyd's system. Both autopsies said this was a homicide, so I think that's something important to keep in mind. But as far as what exactly caused George Floyd's heart to stop beating is still up in the air and differs in those autopsy reports.
Do you think that the prosecution has reached the point or is getting very close to proving beyond a reasonable doubt that it was actually Chauvin's actions that directly led to the death of George Floyd?
You know, that beyond a reasonable doubt part is always difficult. That said, we did hear from a medical expert on the scene who actually dealt with George Floyd's body, and he said, in his opinion, that this was asphyxia, which is what the prosecution has been saying for this entire time. And that is kind of the linchpin there from a medical perspective. But again, beyond a reasonable doubt is very difficult. Intent is very difficult, and that's what they're going to have to prove if they want to get a second-degree murder charge or a third-degree murder charge in this case. But I think what's really important and something you have to keep in mind as this thing moves forward is the time. So much of police defense rests on split-second decision. It is part of the Graham v. Connor Supreme Court decision that guides how police officers use force. And so that time period, 9 minutes, 29 seconds, that is all captured on video from every angle is tough because and we've seen this video several times, but if you watch it, George Floyd goes silent and there's another at least 3 minutes where Derek Chauvin just doesn't move. Even the other officers, J. Alexander King and Thomas Lane, who were holding George Floyd down at a point, removed themselves from his body, and Derek Chauvin still has his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so I think that time period is going to be really difficult, and that's why you don't see the same police presence and police backing that you typically do in these cases.
Jamal, thank you so much indeed. Jamal Andress, who is a criminal justice reporter for Newsy in the US. Take care, Jamal.